Recognize Representative Campbell, who's also, I believe, involved with this committee. I'm glad to have you here, Representative.
Current regulations that apply to groundwater extraction, just for your information, and there are a number of different. Some people look at our regulations and look at the structure of our agencies and say, well, we have a problem in Maine because there isn't just one place where you go to get a permit for groundwater withdrawals of any kind. There's not something that is singular and global, but there are a whole number of current regulations that apply to groundwater withdrawals, and that's what I've summarized here. They're distributed in a number of agencies, but we work together not just through the Water Resources Planning Committee, my group here, but also when they are, any of these agencies are dealing with individual permitting. So the very first one is very simple. It's just a water use reporting requirement. So any user of more than 20,000 gallons a day has to report usage, and that covers all areas of water use for any purpose, surface and groundwater. It's in the statutes, not in the rules, if that's what you're asking. It doesn't include things like private wells. So there was 8 or 9 billion gallons of water use that is not in this because it's private wells. It does include all the public water systems. It includes bottled water. It includes large agricultural use. It includes any large industrial use of water resources. But there are small, I don't know what the percentage is of smaller scale local uses that aren't captured in this water use reporting, because what we were trying to do was identify the big water users or the hot spots where there may be problems because of localized intense water use. To try to accumulate all the detailed water use statewide would be a fairly large and expensive task, so we elected to let's focus on watersheds where there may be, because of individual intense uses, where there may be some conflicts in what's available versus what's being used. And I emphasize that when we did that analysis, a big part of the water use in a watershed was what was required for natural stream flow. So it's not just all the human uses, it's what the natural system requires as well.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to site location law. Any large facility that requires a site location permit, and that's anything that disturbs at least 3 acres of area. So it's a large commercial facility, a manufacturing facility, a large subdivision. If there are going to be water uses, they get scrutinized through the site location process. And for groundwater, the permit will then have limits on how much groundwater can be used and monitoring requirements. And also under each of these site locations and others, several of the others, there's the requirement that if that the limits on withdrawal can be reduced or adjusted in response to climate. So if we go into a drought period and there's large-scale water withdrawals for some activity at one of these facilities, the regulatory agency, which in this case is the DEP, has the authority to reduce what the water withdrawals are for whatever that permit is. DHHS looks at bottling licenses, mostly from the standpoint of water quality for human consumption, but also addresses to some degree impacts of withdrawals on neighboring resources. But that really, the impacts on neighboring uses of or other uses of water resources really gets handled under primarily the significant well permit, which I'll get to farther down in the list. The bulk water transport law has been around for a number of years now, since the late 80s. Its intention is to limit water withdrawals from a community in containers larger than 10 gallons. So these are bulk water transports across town lines. Actually what it is a prohibition against that, and there are waivers that have to be renewed on a 3-year basis to allow water withdrawals that are documented to not have local impacts, et cetera. There are a lot of details in there that I'm not going to go into right at this point. But I want to point out that in 2007, one of the changes that was made was that any of these larger withdrawals that, of 50,000 gallons or more per day would come under a significant well permit. So what's left under bulk water transport are really very small, the very small water users at this point. In LERC jurisdiction number 5 here, any withdrawal, either for commercial purposes or for agriculture, gets a very extensive and rigorous review under the standards of LERC permitting, and all these permits are conditioned and have monitoring requirements and allowance for reductions in withdrawals when climate conditions require it. The next one is the significant well permit. So any well that's within 500 feet of a surface water body and producing 50,000 gallons or more per day has to get these are non-agricultural wells, has to get a NRPA permit from the DEP. If you're farther away than 500 feet, the 500 feet was to give some protection to, give some more intense scrutiny to wells that are closer by and have more potential to impact surface water bodies or wetlands. But farther away than 500 feet, the limit's up to 144,000 gallons per day. That comes to 100 gallons per minute for a well. And while that's a large well, it's not outrageously large in terms of the kinds of wells we see in the state of Maine. So it captures, both of these provisions capture the major large-scale water uses under an NRPA permit. But the agricultural wells are exempted from that. Lastly, there's the Chapter 587 in-stream flow rules that were passed just a few years back that set requirements on how much water, it sets limits on surface water and groundwater withdrawals when nearby streams are below certain thresholds of flow. And those thresholds are based on natural flow conditions, and there are seasonal changes in what those minimum flows should be, and when those thresholds are crossed, when the streams go below those thresholds, then there's limits on both surface and groundwater withdrawals, and those apply to all water uses. So that's in a nutshell, and I've given links to all the specific information, but those are the primary laws that focus on water withdrawals in Maine. I think later on, folks from the Attorney General's office will amplify a little bit on this, along with some case law, but that's just a brief overview. Every permittee has monitoring requirements, and the details of that monitoring are really case by case, depending on the exact situation of the water extraction versus protected resources like wetlands or other aquatic habitat or surface water bodies. So, but there are regular requirements, and they're specific to each permit. It's at least it's more than yearly, I think at least seasonally because of seasonal variations. And then there's reporting at least annually, and the provision that, state regulators can look at those records at any time as well.
So the second part of my question is this self-reporting, or is there an independent monitor from an agency or an outside group that comes in to do the monitoring?
The monitoring is done through, in large part, by professional consultants within the state of Maine and in neighboring areas, and they are hired by the permittee to do that work, and the work is then reviewed at by the state regulators. And all of the consultants that do this work have to be certified professionals in the state of Maine. Other questions? Yes.
You mentioned in the significant well section.
Right.